Welcome everyone to a special edition of Desi Deep Dive. So I believe you guys must have watched Mayank's solo analysis on Man of Steel, and it was deliberately done because we wanted to try out a different format, and we understood that, of course, when we are discussing together, things tend to heat up a little because we have differing point of views. He comes from a different place when he wants to talk about the Snyderverse, and I come from a completely different place. And I mean, for a healthy debate to happen, it is very interesting because, of course, without differing point of views, a debate cannot happen. This solo series is something which we wanted to try out because, at times what happens is uh, I may have watched some movies which Mayank may not have watched, and maybe he's not even interested to watch. Because I remember there was a movie, a Telugu movie, Aravinda Sameda Veera Raghava. It starred Junior NTR, Pooja Hegde, and it was made by Trivikram. I actually enjoy this movie a lot. So I watched that movie and I wanted to analyze this movie right before Devara was coming out. So I asked Mayank to watch it and he did not like it. So he could not even watch the entire thing. He watched like about half an hour of the movie and he was like, मेरे से नहीं हो रहा भाई, मेरे को नहीं करना. So I respected his decision and I was like, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, मत देख. It's not everyone's cup of tea to understand the cultural nuances where that particular story comes from or what the subject matter of that particular movie is. So I respected his decision. I was like, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, हम देवरा देख लेंगे, हम we'll just analyze देवरा, let's just chuck it all together. Basically, through this particular analysis, I wanted to convey where my history with the character and my history with DC and how I responded to Man of Steel when I had first watched it back in 2013. That is the reason why I decided not to take part in Mayank's analysis, because I realized that he should be given that space to express his thoughts without any sort of interruptions. And if that particular format works, we'll do more solo reviews. Otherwise, aisa nahi hai ki we are not we don't worry, we are not splitting the channel or we are not going our separate paths or anything. Anyways, I've been rambling for a long time. Let me just come back to Man of Steel and let me come back to basically Superman and the entire DC universe as a whole. I have been a DC fan since I was 8 years old, and this was before the age of internet. The exposure to these characters, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the entire Justice League, this happened through Cartoon Network, and this happened through the animated series, which I later learned that it was its own interconnected universe, much like the MCU is right now. So it was called the DCAU, the DC Animated Universe. This was started in the 90s, and this was started by Bruce Timm, Paul Dini. So this is basically dubbed as the Timverse and the Dini-verse as well. So Bruce Timm and Paul Dini. Bruce Timm is the showrunner and an artist, and Paul Dini is also a writer, and I believe he's also an artist. I'm not sure exactly, but yes, Paul Dini has been associated with DC a long time. If any one of you have played the Arkham video games, the Batman Arkham video games, the first two Batman games, Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, they were actually written by Paul Dini. So that is why you have a lot of characters and you have a lot of voice actors from the animated series reprising their roles in these video games. So in Batman Arkham Asylum, you have Kevin Conroy voicing the role of Batman, and you have Mark Hamill voicing the role of Joker, because these were the definitive voices for Batman and the Joker for an entire generation, myself included. So for me, the exposure to the entire DC universe was through these animated series, and to this day they are actually the gold standard of animated shows. Everything which came out afterwards, in my opinion, is inferior to whatever these guys made back in the 90s. Basically, the source material of these characters, whether you like it or not, whether you feel that this medium is not meant for mature audiences, or whether you feel that okay, this medium is only meant for kids, which is, by the way, a massive preconception. I disagree with it, because animation, video games and comic books, they are not meant for kids. It's another medium of filmmaking. It is another medium of storytelling. When I first saw Superman the animated series, in every episode of the Superman the animated series, you see this particular visuals that the planet Krypton is exploding, the spaceship is going, there is a baby, and then eventually young Clark grows up with powers. He discovers his powers and he becomes Superman. So this is the exposure. This is the classic exposure to the story. This was the time when I watched the original Superman movie starring Christopher Reeve as Superman, made by Richard Donner, and this came out in 1978. Pretty much the story beats were very similar to what I was watching in the animated series. Because, yes, it was the classic interpretation from the comics. I already was familiar, overly familiar with the character of Superman when Man of Steel dropped. That doesn't mean I'm saying that, okay, when I wanted to watch Man of Steel, I was expecting that, okay, Superman has to be like this. That is the misconception a lot of people have, that okay, I'm a comic book purist. No, I'm not a comic book purist. This is not my culture anyway. When I was entering Man of Steel, I had a lot of expectations because of course the Nolan's Batman trilogy had just ended the previous year, and I still remember I had watched the Dark Knight Rises 3 times in IMAX. By the way, I really enjoy that movie, and attached with that movie was the teaser trailer of Man of Steel. And I still remember that teaser which they had attached with that movie was that clip of Superman just taking his first flight outer space with that sonic boom. So it's a very famous scene later in the movie which you must have remember. It was actually advertised as a movie where Nolan was involved. Christopher Nolan at that time was actually one of the most prominent directors in Hollywood. He was the one who had given the Dark Knight trilogy, and in terms of this, in the superhero circles as well, he was a big name. And Warner Brothers knew that, and they actually wanted him to do the same thing for Superman which he did for Batman. If you think about it, both Man of Steel and Batman Begins, the structure is very similar. When we meet the adult Bruce Wayne for the first time, we see him in prison. He's actually fighting some criminals, and he's this is where he meets Ducard, Liam Neeson's character. We see Bruce Wayne in a very different kind of a setting. I mean, this is not how we expected it. It's a subversion of expectation. A very similar treatment happens here in Man of Steel. Like the very first time we meet an adult Clark Kent, he's working at the oil rig. He's hiding his identity. In Batman Begins, Bruce Wayne is hiding his identity that he's Bruce Wayne. Here, the same way, Clark Kent is hiding his identity of who he is. He's trying to figure himself out. Both these characters are in the same place mentally. Both of them have been through their respective traumas. Both of them have been through their respective struggles in this kind of realistic society. And both of them are trying to figure out who they are. I understood that, okay, this is the kind of treatment which Warner Brothers wanted with Superman, and I could see that, okay, I see a lot of Nolan in this particular treatment of Clark Kent, how we meet him. And of course, in Man of Steel, that back and forth happens, that non-linear structure happens. You cut back to Clark's past when he was a child, how he's discovering powers, and how he's being treated as an outcast. Very, very much similar to how Nolan does in his movies, that non-linear structure that happens in Batman Begins as well. This is why I say that Man of Steel and Batman Begins have a very similar structure. Them having an existential crisis as to who they are, them trying to figure out who they are. I was actually with the character, and I was very interested to see a very different take of Superman so far. Now, I'll talk about my issues where they start. The issues begin with the treatment of Clark's life in Smallville in Man of Steel. Now, I'm going to compare this with the original 1978's Christopher Reeve Superman. So, I'm just going to go over a brief, sequence of events on what happens in that movie. The movie begins in Krypton, much like how it began in Man of Steel, and it's a very similar scene. Basically, actually, one major difference is that in Man of Steel we see the birth of Kal-El. that is very different. I mean, that is a very fresh interpretation of what Krypton is as a society. So they completely change it in Man of Steel. So in the original 1978 Superman, what happens is the opening sequence is okay. By the way, Marlon Brando, those who don't know, Godfather, the guy who played the Godfather, he plays Jor-El. So we see Jor-El sentencing General Zod and his followers uh, to banish, and he's banishing them to the Phantom Zone for because they had committed some treason or something like that. So this is how the movie begins. General Zod actually vows to Jor-El that he is going to take revenge for what Jor-El is doing to him, and he is going to make his heirs pay for this as well, foreshadowing the part that he's going to go and take revenge from Jor-El's son or daughter or whoever whoever comes after him. So this is his vow before being banished to the Phantom Zone. The very next scene, we see that Jor-El is in front of the council, Krypton's High Council, and he's trying to argue that this planet is going to blow up. Krypton is going to blow up in 30 days. And the council disagrees with him. The council feels that, okay, this is not, if you come out and you reveal this information to the population, there's going to be massive panic, and if you do that, we are going to banish you to this to the Phantom Zone, the same Phantom Zone where in the literal previous scene Jor-El had banished General Zod. So we as an audience, those who don't know the history of Superman or anything about this universe, they'll immediately know that okay, this is a big deal, because in the previous scene itself, Jor-El had banished these outlaws into the Phantom Zone, and the council was threatening to do the same thing to Jor-El if he was going to cause massive panic. So it was basically bureaucracy and politics which they were setting up to show that even Krypton as a society was imperfect. It was not a perfect world. It was very imperfect. And Jor-El, he says that okay, fine, I'm not going to reveal. He gives in. He's like, I'm not going to cause mass panic, and I also vow that neither me or my wife are going to leave this planet. So he chooses these words very carefully. Him and his wife are not going to leave this planet. And we as an audience, we know that of course he has a son, so he's going to build a spaceship and he's going to dispatch his son away. This setting gets created that we have Jor-El and Lara, why they are not leaving Krypton, and they have and this planet is about to get doomed, and they are going to send their son away. The scene plays out very similarly to Man of Steel as well, where Jor-El is preparing the spaceship for Kal-El. Lara is actually holding the baby Kal-El, and she's concerned for the baby boy's safety. Over there as well, it's played out very similarly. Even the dialogue between the two characters play out eerily similarly. It's as though that okay, it's taken word to word and just given a new spin in Man of Steel. So over there, Lara is actually scared that why are you sending him to Earth? The planet over there is 1,000 years behind us. Jor-El in that movie replies, yes, but Kal-El will have an advantage over there because of the yellow sun, and his abilities will be increased. He will be able to defy gravity, he will have super strength, he will have super speed, he will basically be invulnerable. A very similar line of dialogue is uttered by Jor-El in Man of Steel as well. The only difference is he literally comes out and says he will be a god to them. So that is the primary difference between Snyder's Jor-El and the Donner's Jor-El from 1978. It's like over there they don't use the word god. Here the word god is used. This is a primary difference between the treatment of these two movies. But so far, the character of Jor-El was very similar in these two movies. They are trying something new, they are setting up a new story, but they have retained the essence of who Jor-El is. Over there as well, Jor-El is actually looking at it in terms of a scientific, an analytical mind. Here, that's present. He's also looking at it in terms of a scientific and analytical way, but he's with that one line that Kal-El will be perceived as a god, that also shows a little bit of arrogance in the Jor-El of, in Snyder's Jor-El, that okay, he's sending Kal-El to Earth to kind of be like a, for a higher purpose or whatever. I mean, we later discover that it's a completely different thing. He wanted to terraform the planet, and he actually wanted Krypton to emerge on Earth. That is why maybe Kal-El was also sent. That is a completely different thing. But so far, with the information which we have gotten between these two characters, I could say that it is very comparable. Then the launch of the spaceship happens, Krypton starts getting destroyed, and in the spaceship itself, in the older movie, in the 1978 movie, what happens is Jor-El had left a lot of recordings about, you know, informing the baby Kal-El that what is his powers going to be. Like he basically, that scene was intended to be like a exposition for the audience, informing us about the, okay, Superman, this kid is going to have super speed, he's going to have heat vision, he's going to have super strength, something like that. So these things were explained to baby Kal-El while he was traveling from Krypton to Earth. And during this time he also grows up a little. So when he's put in the spaceship, he's literally तो टकला होता है वो, बच्चे बाल नहीं होते उसके. And in a short span of time we see that okay, he's also grown up a little. Goes to show that he was actually on the spaceship for a longer time. Maybe he was there for a year or two. So when he crash lands on Smallville, he's discovered immediately by Martha and Jonathan, and they take him in, they adopt him, and they raise him as their own child. Now in the original 1978 Superman, the immediate next scene, what happens is we see Clark as a grown-up boy. He's not fully formed. He's played by a different actor when he's shown as a teenager. In Man of Steel, they show Henry Cavill as the teenaged Clark as well. That doesn't work for me because he does not look like a teenager. Even though they shaved him, he did not look like a teenager. For me, at least, he was looking too old. But fine, I was able to suspend my disbelief. But in the original one, they had actually cast a different actor to play young Clark Kent, who was still in school, who was still trying to figure himself out, who was still trying to, adjust being an outcast. The scene which we see is he's in a school, and he's the helper who's stacking all the I guess over there rugby. Rugby is a popular sport, so a lot of guys are playing rugby. Clark is not playing rugby. He's actually being the bell, a kind of boy, वो जो टेनिस में जाके वो बोतल देते हैं ना सबको, कि helper type. So he's being that kind of a boy. He's taking all the helmets from the players, stacking them, and he's hiding who he is. So it automatically shows that Clark, he knows his strength, he knows his powers, but he's not choosing to reveal them, and he's choosing to be like a fattu guy. That is what he's trying to, because he's hiding who he is. And in this interaction we see that he also gets bullied by one of the players. So one of the girls, Lana Lang, she invites Clark to come somewhere to go on a date or something like that, and he's also interested in it. He has a crush on the girl. He wants to say yes, but immediately one of the players comes, he bullies Clark, and he just shames him in front of everyone, and then climbs on a car, takes the girl with him, and then leaves. And all the kids are pointing at Clark, and they are saying, "Oh, such a loser," or something like that. So this automatically sets up the fact that he is an outcast, and he's different. He doesn't belong to these people. This one scene is enough. In the very next scene, what happens is we see his frustration. Clark, in his frustration that he gets bullied, and if he wanted, he could have easily beaten that guy up. He just takes the rugby ball, he kicks it hard, and it just goes flying, because he's Superman, and he's angry. I mean, we see the burst of anger in that one particular scene. Then he starts running. When he starts running, he's actually shown to be like he's enjoying himself, and he's racing with a speeding train. So he's running as fast as a train. He overtakes the train and just jumps in front of the train and goes like that. As reference, basically you've seen that movie Kick, right? किक में वो सलमान भाई करते हैं ना साइकिल के साथ, कि साइकिल ट्रेन के सामने जाया, साइकिल को ऐसे धक्का दिया और फिर वो साइकिल के सामने से चल के जा रहे हैं और पीछे से ट्रेन जा रही है. इट इज़ समथिंग वेरी सिमिलर. बेसिकली यंग क्लार्क जम्प्स राइट इन फ्रंट ऑफ द ट्रेन एंड देन ही इज़ running so fast he manages to reach a place. उनसे पहले वो पहुंच जाता है and he's standing like this and the kids ask him, hey, how did you reach here? And he's like, I ran. So this goes to show that he's trying to blend in and he wants to be part of that group, but nobody is letting him be part of that group. Now Jonathan actually is watching what is happening in this particular area, and Jonathan comes out quietly, puts his hand on Clark's shoulders. This one action is enough to show the relationship between this father and son. This shows that how affectionate these two are with each other. And Jonathan asks Clark, I mean, you are trying to show off a little, aren't you? And Clark is like, I know I'm not supposed to show off, I know it's wrong, but I hate people like him. He's referring to the bully. So this goes to show that he knows what is at stake. If he reveals his powers, what will happen? But at the same time, he's a child, he's a kid. I mean, not a child, he's a teenager. He's still figuring himself out, and he's hormonal. He's not able to handle those emotions. So he says, I want to beat people like him up, and if I wanted, and Jonathan immediately is like, yes, I know, if you wanted to beat him up, you could have beaten him up. Then the most important line which Jonathan says, I don't know why you are here, I don't know who's what was the reason or who sent you here, but you are meant for great things. However, you are not meant for, scoring touchdowns or beating bullies up. That is what Jonathan says here. Immediately reinforcing this particular thought that Clark is here for a higher purpose, but he should rise above the hate. So he's already building this foundation up. He's actually grounding him. He's that is good parenting. He's giving him values. Jonathan is actually giving him values. And Clark is like, yes, Dad, I understand. And immediately what happens is Clark says, oh, okay, do you want to race me? So like a father and son, Clark immediately, and in the previous scene itself, we had just seen that Clark was faster than a train. But he is affectionately asking his dad that, oh, do you want to run? He knows his dad is a human. He knows his dad is old. He also knows his dad has a heart condition, which was set up in the first scene. In the first scene when Jonathan and Martha discover that baby, that when the spaceship crash lands. But despite that, just like an ordinary father and son, he asks him, do you want to race me? And Jonathan, despite being so old, he's like, oh, okay, let's race. And he starts running. So Clark is running very, very much like a normal human. He's not running like a superboy. He was just running while he was trying to overtake the train. He just runs into the farm where he grew up. And immediately we see Jonathan running, and he stops. He holds his hand. He realizes that, okay, his left hand is hurting. He realizes his heart is giving out. He's like, oh God, oh no. He collapses and he's dead. Immediately, Clark comes running and he knows it's too late. Then it's like Jonathan has died. Then a funeral happens. In the funeral, Clark and Martha are standing, and he says this line, despite all of my powers, I was helpless. I could not save him. This is it. This is the most important lesson he learns as Superman. That, despite him having all those abilities, he's not a god. He cannot save everyone. He cannot stop death. The character of Jonathan here and the character of Jonathan in Man of Steel, they wanted the same thing. They wanted the son to be protected, and they knew that he was not. So the only difference is that in the original Superman, Jonathan believed he was not ready. Clark was not ready to face the world. He had to, basically, it was the same lesson which Ben Parker gave Peter Parker. With great power comes great responsibility. They don't say it outright, but it's implied. Here, in contrast, Man of Steel's Jonathan is like, the world is not ready for Superman. The world is not ready for Clark. So he is active. That is the change in approach between the two fathers. The original movies, Jonathan has given his son everything he could. He has given his son a childhood, freedom, and ability to explore who he is, but at the same time, he's trying to mold his son in such a way that he becomes a good person. Once he's ready to face the world, he will go and face the world. Over there, it's completely different. Over there in Man of Steel, what happens is Jonathan is actively trying to hide his son from the world. He's actively trying to make sure that Clark never shows himself. So he's putting pressure on his son to hide who he is. Here, the father is not putting pressure on his son to, not be who he is. Over there, Jonathan wants his son to be human. He doesn't want him to be a superhuman. Of course, there is an inconsistent dialogue where Jonathan says, "You are meant for great things," and subsequently in another scene, he says, "Oh, what's wrong in being a farmer?" So that was a very contradicting dialogue. I was like, okay, what is even Jonathan's character? Like, क्या कर रहे हो तुम? ऐसे inconsistencies क्यों create कर रहे हो? That is the problem I have with, that is another problem I have with the interpretation of Jonathan in Man of Steel. But the most important lesson which Superman learns in this particular 1978 version of movie is, despite all his powers, he cannot save everyone. It is explained beautifully, and it has so much more impact. The same thing. Now, the most infamous tornado scene, which I absolutely hate. A lot of you came and were arguing with me that, oh, he was trying to protect his son. This is what an ordinary father would do. This is what a human father would do. I agree, but it was written very horribly. That was the same lesson which Jonathan wanted to teach Clark, which we saw in that earlier movie. But here it is shown terribly, because I don't buy for a second that Jonathan sacrificing himself like that is going to help Clark in any way. It only confused him further. He was like, okay, he had to hide himself a lot. He was trying to be overprotective, and he wanted to basically keep Kal-El hidden away. An example which I want to bring up is Jonathan was behaving the very same way how Rekha's character from Krish was behaving. She wanted to hide Krishna from the entire world. She did not want his powers to, come out into the world and reveal. But there was a reason for it, because the same powers had caused her son Rohit Mehra's death, which is why her overprotective nature was justified there. Here, we don't see any reason for Jonathan's overprotective nature. Why? Yes, I understand he's a father, but at the same time, why, as a father, he wants his son to be hidden away? And okay, if for the sake of argument, if I say that Jonathan wanted Clark to be ready, but he's not even preparing Clark for the world. He's actively confusing him. जब वो आके पूछ रहा है कि should I not have saved those children, he's again confusing him, saying that okay, maybe you should have let them die. What? I mean, it's like he was keeping Clark prisoner. He just wanted Clark to be, live in that farm and then just be hidden away from the world, just like so it's that did not work for me. That is not Jonathan. That is the essence of Jonathan was completely massacred in Man of Steel. Okay, a lot of you keep asking that, oh, why should we watch other movies when there is Man of Steel? See, ultimately it's all about characterization. This character, why Jonathan is behaving in this way, I understand that, but there is no basis of definition. There is something which the movie does not clear cut come out and say why Jonathan is actively trying to prevent Clark from coming out. I mean, yes, he gives a reason that, oh, if the world discovers who you are, then people will be afraid. Okay, fine, but why does he think the world is like that? Because ultimately there is a lot of evidence which happens where we see that when Clark saves that boy in Man of Steel from the bus, the boy actually becomes an ardent devotee of Superman. He's not scared, he's actually worshipping him. What Jor-El had visioned for Clark, that is what was happening. He was actually becoming a god. But Jonathan did not want him to be a god. Okay, fine. But at the same time, how Jonathan was treating him, it felt like he was cursing Clark, and he was punishing him to be a prisoner, and that was unacceptable for me. Which is why in Man of Steel I had a problem with the way that tornado scene played out. That okay, he was actively trying to manipulate Clark into hiding who he is and putting him in that existential crisis of who he is, which is why we see he suffers a lot. I mean, he's mentally messed up completely. Snyder's Superman is completely messed up in the head, whereas the Superman, both James Gunn's Superman as well as the 1978 Superman, they clearly know who they are. Of course, in James Gunn Superman, there is another layer where basically he realizes that Jor-El and Lara sent him for a different purpose. So that is another thing I have a problem with. I don't like the way Jor-El and Lara were treated. Maybe it's a fake message. Maybe in a subsequent sequel they will address that issue. But in terms of characterization, at least compared to Man of Steel's Superman, James Gunn's Superman was much better mentally. He had a good support system. Even when he was going through some existential crisis, he could go back to his mom and dad, his adoptive parents. Here in Man of Steel, what happens when he's facing an existential crisis, when basically General Zod comes and announces to the world that okay, Kal-El has to surrender himself. Instead of going to his mom, he's going to a church. I mean, seriously. So he's actually all alone in this world. Even his adoptive parents are not able to support him, so he's all alone. So that is the primary difference. That is the reason why Snyder's Superman is like that, and Snyder's Superman is a little cold. He doesn't have attachment, and he's not able to fully be the beacon of hope how Superman is supposed to be. I just wanted to point out the difference between the treatment of these emotional and character beats between the two movies. And I will argue that the 1978 Superman, all of these portions are amazing. You should go watch this and you will understand what I'm talking about, because it clearly defines who Superman is, and it gives us the kind of Superman which Man of Steel wanted to give. In Man of Steel, it is very confusing. Okay, now I'll address this one aspect where people say that, if you are a comic fan, you cannot expect the character to stay the same, and you always have to enter a movie expecting the character to behave this way. Then that way no new interpretation will be possible. Yes, I very much understand that, but at the same time, the only problem I have is that for a lot of people, Man of Steel became the source point of what Superman is. And that is further from the truth. It is just an interpretation. It is one in a many different interpretations of Superman. I'll give you I'll basically, there is a Superman comic series called Superman Red Sun, And there was an animated movie which came out in 2020 as well, titled the same, Superman Red Sun. In that storyline, what happens is, instead of landing in Smallville, Kansas, Superman's pod lands in Ukraine, and he grows up in Soviet Union, and he grows up under Joseph Stalin. So he grows up to become a dictator. Completely different Superman, completely different interpretation of Superman. But imagine if someone had watched that, and then that is what their idea of Superman was like. No, that is the reason, that is the thing I have for Man of Steel. Man of Steel is an interpretation of Superman's story, but it is not the definitive Superman. There is a video game called Injustice Gods Among Us. In over there, what happens is, basically in Dark Knight, what Joker does to Harvey Dent, he does something similar to Superman in that particular video game. He kind of, I think something happens where Superman is seeing a hallucination, and he feels that he's actually fighting Doomsday, and he ends up destroying Doomsday. In the end, he realizes that it was a hallucination, and he was actually fighting Lois Lane. And Lois, he was married to Lois, and Lois was pregnant, and Joker had forced him to believe that he was fighting Doomsday, but it was ultimately Lois. And when Lois dies, her heart was connected to a nuclear bomb in Metropolis, and Metropolis blows up. So Superman becomes the villain of this particular story. He becomes a dictator. He wants to ensure that nobody like the Joker ever comes again. He kills the Joker, and he effectively becomes a dictator, and Batman opposes him, that okay, you are turning into a fascist. Very interesting interpretation of Superman. But again, this is not who Superman is. They took aspects of the character and came up with a new interpretation. And there is a storyline, Flashpoint. In Flashpoint, not the movie which we saw, Flashpoint Paradox, there is it's another popular comic. There is an animated movie as well, you should check that out. It's an amazing movie. In the Flashpoint Paradox, what happens is, Barry Allen, the Flash, he saves his mother, and because of that, the timeline changes. What happens is, Superman's pod, instead of crashing on Smallville, it crashes in Metropolis, and Superman gets taken by the government, and he grows up in captivity. People actually are the government is experimenting on him. So he grows up as a weak, completely malnourished human, superhuman, and he's hidden away from the world. Finally, when there is a war going on, the Justice League break him out, and then he takes part in the battle. So again, another interpretation, but that is not the definitive interpretation. This is the thing. Ultimately, the source material is the comic books, right? And here it is defined that okay, this character core is like that. If you change the core completely, then that stops being the character. That is what we are trying to say. I mean, that is what I'm trying to say, and that is the only reason why I personally don't like the DCEU. Snyder's DCEU did not understand the core of Batman or Superman. And in Man of Steel, to some extent, I feel that yes, they were trying to do something new. I appreciated their effort for what they were trying to do, but for me, this was not Superman. So, I mean, of course, you guys can disagree with me, but I've presented my views on the topic. So, I guess if you want to have a discussion, we can do so in the comments. But yeah, these are my feelings on Man of Steel, and I thank you guys for watching. So, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys want more of these solo reactions, please mention it in the comments, and we'll be more than happy to tackle different movies individually. So yeah, thank you guys.